Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast, presented by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. My name's John Schmelk, coming to you from the Giants podcast studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. Welcoming back in a friend of the program, he is Clifton Brown. He covers the Ravens for their team site. Clifton, it's good to see you again, man. Hope you're enjoying what I'm sure has been a very busy offseason with both of us dealing with coaching changes here.
Absolutely. You know exactly how it's been up there. Obviously, with Coach Harbaugh leaving here and going there, it's been part of a crazy offseason with 10 NFL teams changing coaches. So very interesting, but the dust is starting to settle.
How surprised were you when they decided to move on from Harbaugh?
I was surprised, but not shocked, because obviously there have been rumblings. They did not make the playoffs. And as Steve Bisciotti said at his press conference, they had gone from 2023 reaching the AFC Championship game to 2024 divisional round, and then 2025 not making the playoffs. That was the wrong direction. But, John Harbaugh been here 18 seasons, incredible career, winningest coach in franchise history, close relationship with Steve Bisciotti. For all those reasons, it definitely was, a monumental decision that's obviously going to change the direction of this franchise.
And I'll get back to Harbaugh at the end here, but the reason we get Clifton on is that he's obviously had up close and personal relationships with a lot of the assistant coaches that John Harbaugh brought over with him from Baltimore to the New York Giants. So I want to try to touch on those, and then we'll kind of touch on the big man again when we get to the end. And it's funny, Clifton, when I was looking at some of these coaches and looking at their history, a lot of them were with the Ravens, but a lot of them not for very long, because I guess there's been a decent amount of turnover with Mike McDonald coming and going and the movement on the defensive staff where he was working with a lot of guys that had not been on his staff for a long time this past year, huh?
Yes, correct. The Ravens had a lot of success, obviously, during Coach Harbaugh's tenure. So a lot of assistant coaches moved on to other jobs, and he had to constantly, during his time, bring in new staff members, get them up to speed. So yes, even though he was in Baltimore for 18 years, he had a lot of different guys that he worked with. So to me, that was one of the strengths that a lot of people, a lot of coaches like Jesse Minter, who's now the head coach, had spent their formative years or some part of their formative years here with the Ravens. And the Ravens have been able to sustain success even with a lot of turnover underneath Coach Harbaugh.
No question about it. All right, let's start with the guy that I think might have had the longest tenure there that he brought over, and that's the Giants' new assistant head coach and special teams coordinator, Chris Horton. I know it was very important for John to bring him over. Why assistant head coach? I guess I'll start there before we get to the special team stuff. And how does he serve Coach Harbaugh in that role?
Well, I think assistant head coach because John Harbaugh views Chris Horton as a future NFL head coach, a coach who has that type of pedigree. He's following a similar path that John Harbaugh followed as a special teams coach to being a head coach. Even though John Harbaugh had one season as a defensive backs coach, he spent most of his career with the Philadelphia Eagles as their special teams coach and built a reputation as one of the best in the business in that area. And that led him to being a head coach. You still don't see a lot of special teams coaches go right from being a special teams coach to being a head coach. But Chris Horton is a guy that John Harbaugh views as having that type of leadership potential. So there's a new challenge for Chris, working with a new team. But I think obviously they'll bring a lot of similarities from the way the Ravens played special teams to how the Giants now are going to play special teams.
All right, so how do the Ravens play special teams? Very broadly.
Very broadly, aggressive in coverage, physical, as far as defending in special teams. And then as far as returning, obviously the rules have changed a lot now with kick returning for sure. And then punt returning. First of all, ball security, obviously paramount. Being aggressive, but also obviously being smart. The things that you always want a special teams unit to do. And then obviously the kicking game being a huge part of that too. That the special teams, you always want that to be a strength against your opponent. And sometimes, as we know, how you play on special teams can determine how games are won or lost with so many close games in the NFL. So I think you're going to see a disciplined special teams unit with the Giants. Doesn't get a lot of penalties, very good on coverage, and commits or forces some turnovers, but commits very few.
When it comes to the kicking part of it, I always find it funny that a lot of these special teams coaches, they're experts in coverage, return game, and stuff like that. But in terms of actually kicking mechanics, a lot of these guys are not experts in kicking mechanics. So how did the Ravens kind of work that in terms of how they coached up their field goal kicker, where they had, frankly, one of the best of all time in Justin Tucker, and they haven't really missed much of a beat since he left?
Well, the Ravens have an excellent special teams coach in Randy Brown, who is staying in Baltimore as their special teams or kicking coach, so to speak.
Got it.
He's working with Tyler Loop, the rookie kicker. He worked with Justin Tucker. He works with the holders, the long snappers. So that was not Chris's main responsibility in Baltimore. I don't know how the Giants are going to handle that in New York, but with Chris, but certainly Chris's expertise comes in the other parts of special teams besides the kicking game.
And Tyler Loop obviously had a really good year until the one mishap at the end of the year, which was unfortunate for the kid. But obviously he had a good season for the Ravens. All right, that's special teams. Anything else from that group in Horton you think Giant fans should know about?
Well, I just feel like, yeah, Chris is the guy who, with his experience, is going to be good for them. I mean, he spoke to the media every week. He had been a guy who kind of knows his way around the NFL on the week to week. Chris is a very steady guy. Uh, Never changes much from whether they won the game or lost the game. Takes the broad view of things. So, yeah, I'm interested to see too that how which Giants players, which draft picks they play, which young players that he chooses to contribute on special teams. He had a voice in the Ravens draft room when it came down to whether they were going to pick this player or that player.
Okay.
Chris was always the guy, advocating for the player who was better on special teams because he wanted those type of guys. And his coaching on special teams, the performance, a lot of Ravens went from special teams standouts to being defensive standouts as they progressed. So the Ravens took special teams players who were good on special teams. They really felt those players were most likely to develop into guys who could be eventually starters or contributors on defense.
And then the Giants also bringing in members of the strength and conditioning staff, the athletic training staff to assist what's going on here with Aaron Woolman and Ronnie Barnes. Just curious what their overall approach is, Clifton, to that area of the game. How are they with limiting soft tissue injuries? That's really, I think, the main purpose of the strength and conditioning staff specifically and having the guys ready to play. Are they aggressive? Are we going to have like 18,000 guys listed as questionable every Sunday like Bill Belichick used to do? Just how does that whole kind of process work with John as strength and conditioning and medical staff?
Well, as far as conditioning, Coach Harbaugh and his staff, maybe 2, 3 years ago, took a really deep dive into the whole injury question, how to avoid injuries, what's the best way to train, what's dieting, when's the best time to practice. So all those things are going to come with Coach Harbaugh to New York. The Ravens a few years ago switched from practicing in the mornings during training camp to the afternoon. Even though it's hotter in the afternoon, they felt as far as rest and recovery that was the best way to go. And for the most part, over the last few years, they've been one of the teams that had one of the fewest injuries. They feel that the diet and when they practice and rest and recovery has something to do with all that. Strength and conditioning, yeah. I mean, I don't know if John Harbaugh will bring the conditioning test to New York. He certainly, I would be surprised if he didn't. The Ravens, the conditioning test was regarded by players as one of the toughest
Oh,
in the
wow.
NFL, and he would not let players begin to practice in training camp until they pass a conditioning test. So guys who have been here already knew that they always came ready to pass that test. Some new players sometimes would struggle. They were warned about it, but when they really, had to take it, they found out how tough it was. So conditioning is hugely important of what Coach Harbaugh is all about. And yeah, you're going to see that with the Giants.
This sounds like my days here when Tom Coughlin was here, is what that sounds like with the conditioning test and guys gassing it up and down to start practice. So fans aren't going to care about this, but now I'm just curious from my personal schedule perspective. What time did they practice during training camp, Clifton? I'm just curious.
I want to say last couple of years, it's been around like say 1:30 in the afternoon.
Oh,
Practice
wow.
would
Okay.
start. Yeah, I mean it was definitely after lunch. And again, I mean, Coach Harbaugh was asked about that when he made the switch because everybody knows July and August it can get really hot in the afternoon. He's like, look, we know it's hotter in the afternoon than it is in the morning. We that didn't catch us by surprise, but we really feel that
Yeah.
guys can come in, warm up, eat a proper lunch, have more time to get ready for practice, so that when we do practice, even though it's hotter, they're better prepared to deal with what goes on. So yeah, they stuck with it. Once they made the change 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't go back to the morning, and players got used to it. And the Ravens definitely, I know Harbaugh feels that early in the season, if you're in better shape than the other team, that's a big advantage. And a lot of his teams had really good records in September, and they felt like part of the reason was that they were simply in better shape than their opponent.
And again, this is completely inside baseball stuff, so I apologize to the fans for this. And then regular season practice around the same time, and then media like right afterwards around like 3:30, something like that.
Yeah, regular season was late too. Practice was late in the afternoon. Right, practice might end around 3:30. Practices were shorter, as you get into the season, as all teams do. It wasn't like, they're trying to run guys into the ground. But yeah, the schedule never changed. It was afternoon, media afterwards. So yeah, it made for some longer days. Media preferred, the morning practices and getting out. But for what was good for the team, that's what Coach Harbaugh decided he wanted to do.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does.
Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
I will have to warn the wife when I get home today about what the practice schedule might look like, Clifton. I'm not going to lie.
Right.
All right, let's jump to the offensive side of the ball. This is probably the side, and I'm going to touch it first because it's the shorter group. John didn't bring as many guys over from the offensive side that was at least with Baltimore last year. But I'm going to start with the guy who was with them in prior seasons that I know you covered, and that's Greg Roman, who was the offensive coordinator, was eventually let go, hooked up with John's brother Jim in LA with the Chargers. What's the overall philosophy for Greg Roman? Are we talking a lot of under center play action, shotgun? Obviously, he used Lamar Jackson's legs extremely well. The run game was fantastic. Give me a thumbnail on what a Greg Roman offense looks like.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Greg that he's most known for is the run game, and not only the success of his running attacks, but the diversity of them. He will run the ball in any way you can think of. Whether guards, he uses pulling guards, he'll run sweeps, he'll run between the tackles, he'll use the quarterback, out of shotgun, or under center, any kind of way, a fullback. It might be into something else that comes into play. I mean, Patrick Ricard with the Ravens has been a multi-year Pro Bowl quarterback or fullback. A lot of teams don't even have a fullback on the roster. It'll be interesting to me whether the Giants have a fullback that is used a lot as a blocker. So, yeah, 2 and 3 tight ends. Greg Roman loves to use multiple tight ends as well. So, yeah, that's the strength of Greg Roman. What he's kind of built his career on is that wherever he goes, a strong running attack follows, and I would assume that'll be the philosophy he brings to the Giants.
Yeah, and it certainly sounds like he's going to have an influence on the run game here, which makes a lot of sense. Curious in terms of how he used, and I know we kind of saw, but you were up close and personal. If there's something you saw in the way he used Lamar Jackson as a runner that kind of struck you as interesting, because the Giants do have a mobile quarterback in Jackson Dart, obviously not the athlete that Lamar Jackson is, who's probably the most athletic quarterback in the history of football. But clearly Dart's somebody the Giants are going to want to use his legs a little bit. So how did Roman kind of integrate Lamar's mobility into both the pass game and the run game?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, Lamar is one of one, but I think yes, he will probably try and take advantage of Jackson Dart's running ability in that, you know, hitting opponents sometimes when they don't expect it. And always making sure that when he's going to run Jackson Dart, that at least, there's one blocker maybe out in front of him that can kind of, give him a little room. You want your quarterback when he's running to be in open space. You don't want him to have to get past 2 or 3 guys. He'll also use Dart's, I think, ability to run, as a lot of you might see some more RPOs where Jackson Dart is given the option of whether he wants to keep it or run it himself. Like all coaches, Greg's going to try and figure out what guys do best and then use that. I think when he was with Justin Herbert out there with the Chargers, Herbert ran a little bit more. He took more advantage of Herbert's mobility. But again, you also don't want your quarterback getting too many hits. So
Right.
it's kind of a balance he's going to have to strike. But I think he's very good at doing that. And obviously, having Lamar, he's had a really good experience with a guy who can really use his legs. So I think that's going to help him figure out how to best use Jackson Dart and his ability to run.
And then in terms of the run game, obviously Derrick Henry comes the last 2 years, became kind of the bell cow. But before that, it was really a running back by committee situation, right? So he's going to use a lot of guys in different ways.
Yeah, and that's the way most NFL teams go. And so, yeah, I would expect that. I mean, Derrick Henry is one of one. When you have a guy like that, then that kind of changes the equation of how much you want to use him. But yeah, I think that running back by committee and taking the wear and tear off of one guy is generally a good way to go.
No question about it. All right, and then Willie Taggart, the running backs coach, former head coach in college, obviously a lot of experience. What did you learn from him? What is he all about as he arrives to help on the Giants' offensive side of the ball?
Well, Willie was a former college quarterback, and also as a running back coach, he's a guy who I feel like wants to figure out what all the running backs in the room can do and then try and sprinkle them in. I mean, Derrick Henry obviously was the guy in Baltimore, but you saw Justice Hill a couple of years ago had his best season in NFL. I think Willie Taggart had something to do with that. Keaton Mitchell, really a speedy guy that the Ravens has a running back. Willie, I think, was an advocate of making sure that Keaton could have a few plays where his speed, contrasted with Derrick Henry's power, might be able to, get in there and break a run or two. So, yeah, Willie is very, very close to John Harbaugh. He's like another Harbaugh brother, basically. I think he was the best man at Jim Harbaugh's wedding. He played for Jack Harbaugh at Western Kentucky. He's a great friend of John Harbaugh's, and yeah, kind of when Willie is not a head coach, wherever one of the Harbaughs is probably where you'll find him as a coach. So I'm certainly not surprised that he's in New York.
John Soto Podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. All right, Clifton, let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball. Dennard Wilson, we're going to do a longer podcast with someone that covered him for the Titans a little bit later in the week. But he was with the Ravens for 1 year as a defensive backs coach. So give me a thumbnail on what you saw from him as a DB's coach and kind of what his philosophy is back there in coverage.
Yeah, I mean, Dennard is a guy that, to me, when you talk to people about him, they talk about how, bright he is and, potential head coach in the future and definitely, a quality defensive coordinator who, yeah, his strength is one of his strengths, I think, is that he'll show you multiple looks in the secondary. I mean, here in Baltimore, working with a guy like Kyle Hamilton, is a huge advantage, who has a tremendous skill set that you can use in so many ways. I think, though, he will be, Dennard, looking for players like that in New York who, can they play both, the slot and outside? Can they play, in the backfield or deep safety and run up to, or can they blitz? Those type of multiple looks, I think, is what most defensive coaches are looking for now. You got to try and keep some of these quarterbacks off balance, because if you don't, if you show them the same look all the time or most of the time, they're going to figure out how to use it. So, yeah, Dennard, when he came here, I believe he had come from the Eagles. And, yeah, the 1 year here, I think people kind of knew he probably wasn't going to be here for long unless he was a coordinator, because he had kind of like transcended just being a position coach, that, he was viewed as a future coordinator. And then, he went on to Tennessee. So, yeah, I think that him knowing John Harbaugh, obviously John liked what he saw from Dennard the 1 year he was here. For him to be back with the Giants, I think it was a good get for them to get Dennard as a coach. And, yeah, I expect that he'll do a very good job there.
Yeah, it struck me that Harbaugh went with a guy like Wilson, even though there were other defensive coaches that had been coordinators that he had more experience with. So that probably tells you that he was pretty impressed with what he brought to that side of the ball. And we talked about it before, Clifton. John Harbaugh has a pretty good history of figuring out who the good defensive coaches are going to be and putting them in these spots to help his team.
Yeah, no question. I mean, Dennard is a leader. He's got that personality. Yeah, you can kind of see he checks a lot of boxes. He's still, a relatively young guy too. So I think the players are going to connect with him. that was the word out of Philly that, a lot of players like playing for Dennard. The 1 year he was here, he had a good rapport. I felt like with a lot of defensive players, not just the secondary. So, yeah, I mean, as you said, when he John Harbaugh's a coach who is not afraid to have strong personalities around him. He really wants a staff that challenges him just like he's going to challenge them. And, I think Dennard is one of those guys who, he's coming with ideas. He's asking John, he's telling John, like, look, maybe why don't we try and do this? Should we change that? That's kind of what John wants from a coordinator or from assistant coach. And yeah, he obviously got that from Dennard, and that's why he's there.
All right, let's go over to Dennis Johnson, former Celtics point guard. No, I'm just kidding. The defensive line coach for the Ravens, coming over to do the same thing here for the Giants. Obviously, Baltimore, even though maybe this year their pass rush isn't what it has been historically, historically, the Ravens front is kind of what defines them on defense, right? Big, powerful, physical. What does Dennis Johnson bring to that unit as a defensive line coach?
Yeah, well, Dennis is definitely one of those guys that at practice you hear his voice more than most coaches. He's a vocal coach. He likes to demonstrate, drills, a lot of talking. Yeah, I think that he is a guy who players again they gravitate to because he'll be on the bag, demonstrating a drill, how to use your hands. He lets you know when he's happy. He'll let you know like, hey, we need to run that drill again. So yeah, I mean, I think that he's a guy who, I like his personality. I kind of like coaches who, you can go overboard with that, but really they're not only telling you what they want you to do, they're showing you. And yeah, the defensive line now to me is crucially important. It always has been. You talk about winning in the trenches, but you see teams that dominate up front, like the Seahawks did in the Super Bowl, like the Eagles did last year. If you can dominate up front or win that battle up front on defense and put pressure on quarterbacks and snipe out the running game, that's a great formula to win. I mean, so that's what, they hope that, John hope that Dennard helps their young defensive linemen develop and maybe show some of the vets, some techniques that could even help them, even though they've been in the league for a long time. So, yeah, I always enjoyed, watching him work with guys during practices because, it wasn't hard to find Dennis when he was out there.
No question. All right, now let's go to the guy who's going to be his assistant defensive line coach here. That's Matt Robinson. He was the linebacker coach, I believe, right in Baltimore. Younger coach, tell me what you can tell us about him in terms of as an up and comer on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I think that you hit on the head. I think Matt is a guy who, as a young coach, he's learning a lot from other guys on the staff. But yeah, he learns quickly, and then he also has an ability. To me, he struck me more as a teacher type, coach who really could give you information that would help you. And so, yeah, I think this is a good situation for him to be coming to a team where he already knows quite a few guys on the staff. He'll get to work with new players. So, yeah, I think that he's a guy, again, I'm not surprised that he went with John in that he's kind of tracking like a lot of John's assistant coaches that, stay in this system, stay with Coach Harbaugh. It's just going to lead to better things. And yeah, as far as what he'll bring, yes, I do feel that, as a teacher, that he and Dennis and the defensive staff, he's a guy that, he'll blend in well. And the staff, even though it's a new staff, you want as much communication and familiarity with the coaches so that you can translate that to the players. I think Matt will help John do that.
And then a load of younger guys the Giants are bringing over from the Ravens staff, just so fans have the names. Adam Schrack will be on the offensive side of the ball. Matt Pease, who I'm assuming is a son of Dean Pease. Is that correct, Clifton? I would guess.
Correct.
I would guess. Donald Alessio's coming over. Brandon Clark on the defensive side of the ball as well. And you don't have to talk about those guys specifically, Clifton, but in terms of being an incubator for training up young coaches, just knowing where the Harbaughs come from with their father and it's a coaching family, I have to imagine being an incubator for some of these young coaches has to be very high on his priority list.
Yeah, no question. And, John and his brother Jim, and Jack, they've started, the Harbaugh Coaching Academy a few years ago. They want to leave a legacy of coaching behind them. And that's really what they've already done and are continuing to do. I mean, people talk about coaching trees. The Harbaugh tree is continues to grow. I think you're going to see more and more coaches that have worked for him become coordinators, become head coaches. They have a philosophy on, not only how you should coach, but how you should deal with players and how you should help players, become better playing football and also becoming just better at dealing with life situations. Now, the bottom line is to win. So that's always at the forefront. How do we help these guys become better players so we can win? But, John Harbaugh is a relationship guy. The Harbaugh family is a relationship family. And that's why people stay with them. I mean, they have a way of treating people like family in a way, and players appreciate that. And so you'll find a lot of players that played for him when they want to go into coaching or they start thinking about going into coaching is because of the Harbaugh influence. So all of that is going to come, to New York. I watched his press conference there. I saw his father, watching him. I saw, obviously his family being there. But yes, I mean coaching is a family business for the Harbaughs, and that's not going to change in New York.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help. Make sense of your money with Citizens.
All right, couple more on Harbaugh before we say goodbye, Clifton, and I appreciate the time. You've been very generous with it. If there's one thing Giant fans should know about what a John Harbaugh coach team looks like, even if you've seen the talent change from year to year, the players change, what are some of the consistent things that you will see from a Harbaugh team year in, year out?
Physicality. They, yes, will want to impose their will, and they come to be the most dominant team, the most physical team, no matter what. Running the football and stopping the run. That's the basic philosophy of what he wants to do, regardless of what personnel he has. Trying to limit big plays, making you a team, on offense. If you're going to score on us, you're going to have to do it the hard way. And then, I'm interested to see, some things that, didn't go as well the last couple of years in Baltimore, like protecting leads. That was the issue in Baltimore. There were too many games that got away from the Ravens where they were leading the last couple of years that really cost them. Ball security is huge with Coach Harbaugh. And, last year with the Ravens, that was not as good as it had been in the past. So, every team takes its own identity, but very organized. John Harbaugh is, a professional football coach. He knows how to run practices. He knows how to deal with the media. He knows how to relate to players. So he's been through this so much for so long that he just brings a certain level of credibility to the job. I mean, he's not learning on the job. He knows exactly what a head coach should do, how to be successful, and he's done it at the highest level. I mean, he's won a Super Bowl and he's made the playoffs multiple times. So, I think for the Giants, after some of the things they've been through over the last, 8 to 10 years, ever since Tom Coughlin left, yes, John Harbaugh is that type of guy that, just like Tom Coughlin, they're two different individuals, but another professional football coach knew exactly what the job entailed, could really handle almost any situation. That's what the Giants are getting in Coach Harbaugh.
I hate using these labels. You consider him has he developed into more of a player's coach as he's gone along, or is he really more of that, drill sergeant, disciplinarian type? And again, I hate to put guys in those types of buckets, but you understand where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, right. I think that, he's definitely evolved. That's another thing about Coach Harbaugh is that, even, he's not the same coach that he was when he came into the league. I feel like he probably felt he had to establish a certain identity with players and, certain things have to be my way. And I think he has adjusted over the years to become, listening to players more than maybe he did earlier in his career. There was a players council here with the Ravens where 3 or 4 veterans could go to him if there was a problem, if they wanted to change something. His door was always open to them because he likes to give players freedom as far as, that you can say what you want. He doesn't like to put guys in a box personality wise. You can't talk to the media about this. He's not that type of coach, but obviously he wants to know what players are thinking. And if there's a problem, he doesn't want to fester. So I think he's a coach who there are certain things like being in shape, playing together, that he will never waver on. But there are other things that he will consider waving on if he thinks it's best for the team. But you're going to hear a lot of Harbaugh isms, I call them. And one of them is the team, the team, the team. When he's making decisions about what he should do, a lot of it always comes down to what he thinks is best for the team, not for Jackson Dart or whatever player you want to name, what's best for the team. And so you're going to see a lot of that in the decisions that he makes.
It's funny. I interviewed Tom Coughlin after the hire, and him and John are very close over the years, and that was the first thing he said too. Everything is team, team, team. So they very much are cut from the same cloth there. Only two more questions. How much does he pop his head? He's a former special teams coach, right? But he coaches everything. How much does he pop his head in the defensive meeting room? And more specifically for us, just because I'm curious to see what this Matt Nagy, Brian Callahan, Greg Roman conglomeration is going to look like on offense. How much does he kind of give an outline for what he wants like the offense to look like? And he tells you, all right, you guys can color within these lines, but here are the principles I want the offense to adhere to? Or does he really hand the keys to his offensive coach and say, all right, figure out the best way to do this. I got your back.
Yeah, well, only, the coaches know exactly what goes on behind closed doors. But I'll say this, that, John I believe views oversees everything. But, obviously as a former special teams coach, former defensive coach, that would be his, area of most strength, I would say. And offensively, he oversees everything. If he doesn't like something, obviously he has no hesitation about letting that be known. But I do think he, with the play caller, particularly any offense during game days, he likes that person to have the freedom to get in the flow of the game. And there's an art to play calling.
Sure.
Defensively and offensively, but to my opinion, particularly offensively, where, the best play callers they all have a game plan coming in, but you kind of get a feel for what's working early, a feel for when's the right time to call a play, when's the right time to use this formation. There's so much to it that, having not been an offensive play caller, John will rely on the offensive coordinator on game days and, during the week, and the quarterback to figure out that side of the ball and how they want to play things. And then if things don't go well or John is seeing it get away, then he'll try and get them back into what he wants. But yeah, I mean, as the head coach, you're responsible for everything. And John, even though he's quote unquote a CEO type, coach, that's the label they put on him. Yeah, to me, he's intimately involved. All fingerprints on all phases of football, his fingerprints are on it.
And final question, you brought me to my last one, his fingerprints are going to be on everything. This is his building now, right? And a lot of the talk when he got here, how we would work, in conjunction with Joe Schoen to collaborate on decisions in terms of player evaluation, player acquisition in the draft and free agency. How much of an influence did he have with Ozzie Newsome, with DeCosta in the player acquisition process, whether it was the draft or free agency with the Ravens?
Yeah, I think the Ravens have always been collaborative, but I think one of their strengths is that they've had great success working together as a tandem. I mean, Ozzie Newsome, one of the greatest of all time.
Yep.
Eric DeCosta has been with the Ravens from the beginning, always, Eric's or Ozzie's top lieutenant until he became general manager. And Ozzie and Eric still have a close relationship. They're both in the building all the time, working together. And then John and Eric were next door neighbors, in addition to being head coach and general manager, and all are friends. And obviously starting at the top with Steve Bisciotti as the owner. So that type of formula is hard to replicate. But I've seen and read, people asking Joe Schoen about their relationship. I think they'll be fine because John knows that they need to work well together in order to have success. Once you start having, breakdowns in communications and, people being rigid, I want this guy, no, I want that guy, we can't agree, then you're going to have problems. So I don't think that's going to be a problem for John Harbaugh and for the Giants because, he comes from an organization that knows how important it is that everybody has a chance to do their job, have healthy disagreement, express your opinion. But when you draft a player, when you're drafting or making a trade, you're bringing in a giant. This isn't like my player, my pick. It's the Ravens pick. If you keep that philosophy, we're trying to do what's best for the Giants. So if it's a guy that I liked better than you did, well, fine, but it's not my pick. It's the Giants pick. Yeah. I think that's the philosophy that, John's going to bring. And I think, those type things will work out. That won't be, I don't think, why the Giants succeed or fail, the relationship between John and the general manager and general manager owner. I think John is too steady and has too much experience to let that happen.
Hey, look, and if the coach is clear on the type of players that he wants and lets the scouting staff understand that, usually that works, right? I think where you run into issues is where the front office doesn't quite get what the coach wants. And something tells me John Harbaugh is not going to be shy about explaining exactly the type of player that he wants on his team.
No, he had a saying, or, I asked him about a player one time who didn't have a lot to say. And John said, I prefer brief and brilliant, so he wants you to say
I like
what
that.
You have to say, right. Say it quickly, but have it meaning. So yes, John is very clear. Even when you don't agree with him, you understand what he said.
Clifton, awesome stuff, man. Anything we missed that you think in terms of the staff or John or the Ravens culture that you think Giant fans should be prepared for as we kind of start to kick off this offseason process with the Combine next week?
No, I mean, I think, Giants fans should be excited. I'm interested, to see, what the expectations are for immediate success for John among, Giants fans. I mean, I think he's coming to a team that has potential, but certainly, isn't coming into a ready-made situation. It's going to take a little time for everything that his vision of the Giants to take place. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, all these jobs are challenging, but again, I do believe that, yes, that was the move. The Giants made the right move. He was available. He was the guy they wanted. They acted quickly. He wanted to come there. It seems like a really, really good fit. So, yeah, I think Giants fans have reason to be excited because they got the guy who they wanted. And you don't have to ask if John Harbaugh is capable of winning a Super Bowl. He's already been there, done that.
And one thing I forgot to ask you, Clifton, how aggressive has he been in adopting some of the go for it on fourth down stuff that's kind of permeated the league over the years? Is he going to be more aggressive in some of these fourth downs around midfield, or is he going to go more on the conservative side?
No, he's one of the more aggressive guys. I mean, analytics definitely plays into what he does, but there's also times too where he goes with his gut feel. He's not totally wed to the numbers. He wants the information, but if he feels like on fourth down that the players think they can make it and they want to go for it, he usually is going to roll with that. He's a guy who I think likes backing his players. If they want to go for it, if they want to be aggressive, and he's an aggressive guy by nature, yeah, he'll continue to be one of the more aggressive guys in that area.
Clifton, great stuff, man. Are you going out to the Combine in Indy?
I am.
I will see you out there, my friend. Always good to talk to you, and let's catch up over some shrimp cocktail out there at the Sand Levels, all right?
Thanks. I enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you out there, and thanks for having me.
No problem. For Clifton Brown, I'm John Schmelk. That's the John's Huddle podcast presented by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. Coming to you from the Hackensack Meridian Health Podcast studio. Keep getting better. We'll see you next time, everybody.